Why the puddle analogy fails against fine-tuning. This ought to be interesting. It ought to be intelligent and not at all stupid because Stand to Reason says it's all about clear thinking Christianity. Well, this has definitely caught my interest, and if you too are interested, go get your pan-galactic gargle blaster. Don't forget to take a towel, and let's do this thing. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I'm an atheist and skeptic, and lately I've been looking at a lot of arguments for God. And you might not be surprised. Haven't been all that impressed with what I've found. Arguments aren't evidence, as you might know. They're just a bunch of words people put together to say what they think might be true, and a good way to make it seem true to you, too. So in my bebopping around the internet, I came across this, written by Tim Barnett. It dates back a couple of years to 2021, and I'm interested in how the puddle analogy fails. I'll also have you note that they have listed this under science, and I'd like somebody to explain how this particular blog post is science. I don't think it's science at all. I don't see how we're going to make that science except very, very obliquely. But, maybe I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong down in the comments. I'm interested to hear your comments. That's the blibbity blab. Let's just get into it. Many people are fascinated by the fine-tuning argument for God's existence. Yeah, many people. I know we have to start these essays somewhere, but something like this is just like a ridiculous opener. Can't you find something different than this? This is like a first draft, I guess, is what I'm thinking. Anyway, we go on to the many people. The late Christopher Hitchens called the fine-tuning argument the most intriguing. Physicist Sean Carroll referred to it as the best argument that theists have when it comes to cosmology. Well, intriguing doesn't mean true, and the best argument can still be pretty shitty. But yeah, maybe these people said those things, maybe they didn't. I'm not looking it up because I think that these quotes are just here to make us think like, ooh, famous atheists also like fine-tuning. I just have to point out that however intriguing or the best these things are, these are people that remained atheists. So they weren't all that intriguing or convincing, let's say. Let's move on. But just like other arguments for God's existence, there are rejoinders. One popular response is called the puddle analogy. The analogy was originally expressed in Douglas Adams' The Salmon of Doubt, Hitchhiking the Galaxy One Last Time. And we're going to read the analogy. It's one I especially like. I think it's a very interesting thing to think about and ponder what Adams meant. This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it, so the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch out for. And I think as we look at this analogy of a puddle that is aware of its being, that the emphasis is on how it fits, that the hole seems to fit the puddle neatly. And of course we can look at the puddle and say, of course, you're only there because the hole is there. But the puddle does not know the conditions of its own existence. All it knows is how well it fits. And then at the end, the fact that this puddle disappears is a reference to our own precarious place on this earth, that we shouldn't feel like, oh, well, this earth was meant to have us in it, because if conditions change, i.e. climate change and things like pollution and whatnot, like there's not going to be some deity to save us because there's nobody that made this world for us. We evolved into the world, into the conditions that were. But let's keep going and see what the objections are. Adams' analogy offers a creative illustration of the anthropic principle. And it'd be nice if he would talk about that a little bit more. What is the anthropic principle, Tim Barnett? Do you know? Can you define it? Anyway, he goes on. Summarizing the analogy, philosopher William Lane Craig writes, oh yeah, philosopher, lol. One is appealing to a self-selection effect in order to eliminate surprise at what one observes, however improbable. The anthropomorphized puddle can be surprised at its own existence only if the whole exists, so it shouldn't be surprised by how well the whole and it fit If the hole were not there, the puddle would not exist to be surprised about it. You know, I have to admit, I'm not quite sure what the beginning of this quote means. Appealing to a self-selection effect. I don't know what that's about. Maybe I'd have to go look at what philosopher William Lane Craig wrote in that link. But I do want to point out that the puddle was not surprised at its own existence, only how well the hole fit. Like, there was no part of it that said, wow, I exist, I wonder how I exist. It was that the hole fit it so perfectly. All right, but we're going to move on. Let's see where else we go. Some think the puddle analogy deals a critical blow against the fine-tuning argument. Yeah, some think that. What language? If the pondering puddle shouldn't be surprised about its existence, we shouldn't either. Yeah, the puddle wasn't surprised at its own existence. But does the analogy work? Are advocates of the fine-tuning argument engaging in puddle thinking? Yeah, I think you are, actually. Arguments from analogy are a special kind of inductive argument. Are they, though? Are they an argument? Basically, they reason that because two things are similar, what is true of the first is also true of the second. For an argument for analogy to work, the analogy has to be a good analogy. And I guess I'm just thinking analogies aren't arguments. Like, what this analogy serves to do is put us in a different frame of mind. It serves to get us thinking in a different way, but it doesn't actually make an argument. And analogies don't prove things. They lay out comparisons. Like if I said, writing is a lot like tending a garden. Sometimes it's time to put seeds in the ground. Sometimes it's time to trim things. Sometimes it's time to take some things to the curb. None of that is actually going to make writing be like gardening. And there aren't literal seeds in literature, and you don't literally take things to the curb. This is all metaphorical language, and the puddle operates as a metaphor. It kind of reminds me when atheists say to theists, I believe in one fewer God than you. This is not an argument. It is trying to get you to understand how I see the world. And there are lots of gods that you don't accept, you know, like the old Greek pantheon or the Hindu gods, or just name any other god that's not the Christian God. I feel the same way about your God as you do about Ganesh or Thor or Ahura Mazda or whoever. It's not an argument. It doesn't prove that there is or is not a God, but it's trying to get you to see the world differently. That's how analogies are. They're trying to get you to understand the world from a slightly different perspective and engage your creativity. And the puddle argument actually doesn't prove anything. It is trying to get you to see the world from a different perspective. But let's keep going. Of course, no analogy is perfect. There will always be differences. But for an argument for analogy to work, the similarities have to be significant and the differences have to be superficial. But if the opposite is true, if the differences are significant and the similarities are superficial, well, then we have a problem. In other words, if the analogy fails, so does the argument. Now, this isn't an argument again. It's trying to get you to see the world in a different way, and it's trying to get you to see your fine-tuning argument in a different way and why people might not accept it. And I would also argue, again, like I pointed out with that quote, it's not just that Adams is trying to get us to see that the world was not made for us, that it's hard to make that case. But if conditions change, we might not survive in this world, in the one world we know that we live in. That's what the end of that means. So it's not even just about your fine-tuning. It's about being careful of taking for granted the place we live and assume that it's going to be just all fine. But we go on. Let's see what else Tim has for us. Puddle problems. In a recent article titled The Trouble with Puddle Thinking, astronomers Geraint Lewis, not sure if I said that first name correctly, and Luke Barnes explain why this analogy fails. And I love the way he has to define them as astronomers. We're not talking about astronomy. You know, we're not actually working in their field, but maybe this is how Tim justifies this being under science, is we named Sean Carroll back there a little bit, and now we're naming these two astronomers. Let's see what our two astronomers have to say. Consider more closely the puddle's reasoning. Let's name our puddle Doug. He has noticed a precise match between two things, his shape and the shape of the hole in which he lives. Doug is amazed. What Doug doesn't know is that given A, the fluidity of water, and B, the solidity of the hole, and C, the constant downward force of gravity, he will always take the same shape as his hole. If the hole had been different, his shape would adjust to match it. Any hole will do for a puddle. Oh my God, people, do you think that they did not think before they wrote this? Did they have a 10-year-old review this? Any hole will do for a puddle. Like, if you were thinking of starting your OnlyFans channel out there, I have your title. And especially if you're like bi or heteroflexible, what a great name for an OnlyFans, right? Any hole will do for a puddle. Let's see what else Lewis and Barnes say. This is precisely where the analogy fails. Any universe will not do for life. Life is not a fluid. It will not adjust to any old universe. There could have been a completely dead universe, perhaps one that lasts for 1 second before recollapsing, or is so sparse that no two particles ever interact in the entire history of the universe. One of the things that I note with their analysis is that they have shifted the perspective. They're no longer in the puddle view, if you will, and now they are in our view looking at the puddle and saying like, wow, what a dumb puddle. You don't know the conditions of your existence, but I do, and it's really obvious to me. And what Adams is trying to do is give us that puddle view of we are limited beings, and one of the things that we don't know is what kind of universes support life and what kind don't. And we're in a whole realm of things that we don't know. We don't know if there are other universes. We don't know if there are universes that don't support life. We don't know if there are universes that support a life that's different from us. We don't even know if in our own universe there are forms of life like silicon-based life or something like that. There might be other forms of life that just are very different from us, and we don't know. We have a giant universe, most of which we can't really explore all that much right now. We can look out into it. It's really great. It's really cool. And we've discovered a lot, but there's a lot we don't know. We are exactly this puddle. We don't know. The second thing that I will say is that not every hole will indeed form a puddle. There are some holes where the water just drains out right away. No puddle actually forms. And sometimes, if the circumstances are right, the water will freeze and it won't be a puddle, it will be ice. So even this notion of any hole will do for a puddle, which sounds like, yeah, that probably sounds likely true. It's not true. It's not true at all. So this particular rebuttal doesn't really hold water. See what I did there? Yeah. This is why you subscribe to the Scarlet channel, for these really great puns and jokes, people. You know you love it. Haha. Anyway, this particular analysis doesn't hold water. Let's see how Tim keeps going on with it. In the puddle analogy, the puddle, duh, can exist in any hole. That's how puddles work. The shape of the hole is irrelevant to the existence of the puddle. If you change the shape of the hole, the shape of the puddle changes, but you always get a puddle. Now, we've already said it's not true. There are some holes that will not support a puddle. Like, it drains out, it doesn't hold water, others it will form ice. I've already said all that. But let's remember that the puddle analogy, what was interesting was the shape. Doug was amazed at the shape. Doug was not amazed at his own existence. Doug was amazed how well the puddle fit him. And now we're like in this la-la land of, wow, we're amazed that a puddle exists. We are not amazed that a puddle exists. Let's keep going. The problem is life doesn't work like that. Life cannot exist in any universe. The evidence from fine-tuning shows that a life-permitting universe is extremely rare. If you change certain conditions of the universe, you cannot get life anywhere in the universe. For instance, slightly increase the mass of the electron or the up quark, okay, and get a universe with nothing but neutrons. No stars, no planets, no chemistry, no life. I guess my first question for Tim would be, how does he know what conditions would be suitable for life in various universes? I mean, we don't know that other universes even exist, much less what other conditions would be conducive to life of any kind. What we know is the universe we inhabit and the conditions that made our existence possible. But keep in mind that we can't even exist in most of our world, much less the universe. So I find it really strange to think that a deity made this universe and fiddled with all of the sliders and knobs to make it possible for us to exist on a small part of a small planet. For writers of the Bible who didn't leave their small area of the earth and who thought there was a dome overhead, the firmament, It makes sense that they would think these kinds of things. They don't have the kind of knowledge we have today. But with the knowledge we have now and this vast universe that we are beginning to uncover, it seems very wasteful for a deity to make this one tiny place for this one little species to exist, and we can't even inhabit most of our own planet. At the end of the day, we evolved because conditions allowed us to evolve. That doesn't say that somebody created those conditions. You have to show that something, some agent, created those conditions. Let's finish out Tim. See the difference? We know that changing the dimensions of a hole doesn't affect the existence of the puddle. Any old hole will do. Oh, Tim. Oh, any old hole will do. Well, there you go. And there you go. There's your name for the OnlyFans for people above a certain age. For older people, any old hole will do. Not sure if it's available. You might want to check it out. And at this point, I think I need to have a disclaimer. Scarlet Industries is not responsible for any Googling you do after you leave my video and you type in words that you heard on this YouTube video. If you Google any old hole will do, I'm not responsible for what you see. I haven't Googled it myself, but just know I definitely did not send you to do that. And I'm not responsible for any trauma that results from that. Anyway. There is no fine-tuning for puddles. However, we also know that changing the conditions of the universe does affect the existence of life. There is fine-tuning for life. So the puddle analogy has a problem, and it's a big one. It's a false analogy. The analogy doesn't work because getting a life-permitting universe is vastly different from getting a puddle-permitting hole. And I just want to say again, the analogy was not about being surprised that puddles exist. It was about a puddle being amazed at how well the hole fits. And it's the same as people like Tim here getting all excited that the conditions that allow our existence are exactly what allow our existence. And if we go again to the end of that puddle analogy where we should be careful because we might disappear, we should be aware that we can disappear. We should be aware of this. It is often Christians who think that we should not worry about climate change, that we should do nothing to mitigate it because this planet was made for us and God has us in mind, and a lot of us don't accept that, and hence the puddle analogy. I have to say it's disappointing to see that somebody doesn't take the analogy for what it's intended to do, which is see the flaws in your own argument. The puddle analogy actually doesn't, quote unquote, disprove fine-tuning. What it says is it isn't enough because think of the way you exist from this perspective. We are like the puddle thinking that everything fits our existence. It's the right shape. Now, the puddle analogy doesn't prove anything. It doesn't establish that fine-tuning doesn't exist. It just says that your argument isn't enough and you need more. But I think from Tim's perspective, everything's an argument and everything's meant to pull us away from God. And it's not meant for him to think about anything. It's meant for him to try to justify what he already thinks. I think that's how he takes everything. But what do you think? I'm looking forward to your opinion. Put it in the comments below. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuffing. I love it when you do the YouTube stuffing. Algorithmo and his consort Algorithma love it when you do the YouTube stuffing. And they will reward you with lots of recommendations of all kinds of YouTube videos, good, bad, and mediocre. Because it's YouTube and there's everything from the wonderful to the wonderfully horrific. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. Here is a QR code with my cute kitties who think that you are buying me some kibble for them. And thank you for all that. Thank you for everybody who has bought me a coffee. Not quite sure what's up next for this channel, but you know, it's going to be stupid. Bye for now.